Partner announced today that we can move forward come Friday. All right, each of you have received a packet of information sort of revitalized from our last meeting. It was all sent out. Charles and the Director of Finance sent out a note asking for questions, and hopefully each of you have had an opportunity to reach out to them and get any questions answered. So with that, I'll turn this over to our city manager to walk through the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members.
Good evening.
Since the last budget meeting, we did go back. There have been some changes to the budget, and if I could direct everyone's attention to the detailed changes that's on your board pack and also in the paper copies in front of you, I thought we'd start with that. What has changed since the last budget workshop meeting, so that we can start from there. And a lot of these changes, I'll say, have come in from council approvals from the last few weeks, where we've approved the Western Sussex Business Campus and added some other things. We'll try to go through that. But at the top there, first is revenue in the general fund, removing the TAP funding. That was a reduction of $668,000. We added back the Sussex County funding for Western Sussex Business Campus Phase 1, $899,000. Transfer from reserves, add GMB rent for the paint and the carpet project of $18,000. Add the land sales for the business park, Phase 1, $149, and then add land sales for Western Sussex Business Park Phase 2, $120,000. And then you'll see down there, add transfer from the water fund for the rate increase. That's $30,400. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So the total changes there in general fund revenue is just over $549,000. There are no changes in the golf revenue, the water fund. You'll see there again, we added back the 3% rate increase, which we were asked to bring back as an option to City Council at this meeting. And then the transfer from reserves, add transfer from Western Sussex Phase 1 infrastructure. So just a little bit of explanation about that. As Council will recall at the last meeting, we presented the bids to George & Lynch, the low bidder for Phase 1 of the Western Sussex Business Park, and that came in at $2.24 million. And we only had $101.88 million from Sussex County. So Council agreed with our funding plan to take some of those funds and close that gap out of our own reserves. So what the Director of Finance has done and has gone through here, it's not fitting. Sorry about that. What the Director of Finance has done here, these are the detail behind that. So in the water fund, that add the transfer for Western Sussex Phase 1, the $212. So that's actually our money that we'll have to bring in from our reserves there, from the water reserves. Sewer fund, so add Sussex County funding back for the, that's the $752,000 that is the piece of the $1.88 million that's coming in from Sussex County. And then to do all the sewer that we need to do for that George and Lynch project, we have to use $400,000 of our own funds. So that was added into the budget. Total changes in sewer revenue was $1.152 million. Electric fund was a little similar, but there's some details here. You see there where it says reduce Sussex County funds for Western Sussex Business Campus of $80,000. And the detail behind that is when we made our first run at the budget, we knew we had funds from Sussex County, so we put that in our budget as a placeholder, that we draw those funds down first. What happened was the bids came in over the $1.88 million, so we had to take that from our own funds to be able to do that. So that's why we had to take it out of revenues from Sussex County and then use our reserves for that piece of it, from the pole line to the entrance. You'll see on the next page there, on my next page, add funding for Phase 1 transformers, $31,000, and then for Western Sussex Phase 1 materials. That $41,000 is associated with Commerce Run. So initially when we planned and did all our estimates, it was Opportunity Drive, the main road coming in. When we negotiated, they wanted, I believe it was lot 8, lot 6. But it's right down Commerce Run, so we had to add additional electrical materials to accommodate that. So the total changes in electric revenue, when you did all the math, is $41,100, and then the total change in revenue was $1.98 million. You'll see in the expenditures, streets, add Western Sussex Business Campus, Schedule A, B, and C. So that $1.049 million is for the roads and the stormwater, because we can't take that from water or sewer reserve funds. So that's that number there. So you got that change continues. Municipal golf, again, no change. Water, you're going back through these. So these are the expenditures. So these just match the revenues so that we can try to get closer to having a balanced budget. I'll just point out a couple other things that are not related to Western Sussex Business Campus infrastructure. Oxic tank repairs, $64,800. There's some tanks down, deoxic tanks down at the wastewater treatment plant that Burley and his men have identified have a crack in it. So they looked at it and they asked our engineers if it could make it another year or if there was concern and we needed to address that this budget year. The recommendation came through that we probably ought to go ahead and do it now. It's a big tank. If we don't have it in good shape, our process could be endangered. So we put it in the budget in the last 2 weeks. We did not want to bring this back, if possible, as an emergency project in the middle of the year. So you see there the total changes in sewer fund, $1.15 million. And then, let's see, pretty much everything else there in the electric distribution is that $41,100 that you saw up there. So that's just the expense side. So the total change in expenditures was $2.485 million, and then the change in the deficit was $499,600. And I'll just, if I can go to this exhibit. So that's our reserve history. That's a graph we look at quite often. And so that's changed. The FY22 number transfer now is 865, 891. It was quite a bit less when we looked at it last time. But these are the changes that have occurred that have put us there. In sending this information out and receiving comments back from council, we got asked to look at some options to reduce that number. And what we'd like to do, what our goal here to do, is to try to reduce that down to get it into the $750,000 range where we were in FY 18, 19, 20, that bandwidth there if possible, or even lower if we can. It's our ultimate goal. So the memo that you have in your board pack and on your paper package, there's 4 options that are in there to reduce that deficit reliance or transfer from our reserves. And I'll just go, they're in no particular order really. But our budget revision from our first budget workshop, it's resulted in a increase in the proposed budget deficit from $366,291 to $865,891. So it's increased overall $490,600. That's the difference. So just a couple options for council to consider. We could increase the realty transfer tax. Our original budget number was $400,000. We could increase that to $550,000. That would be an increase of $150,000. And where we landed on that number, or suggesting that number for consideration, we did an average of the prior 3 years, and that average equates to about $550,000. So that would reduce the deficit from $865,891 to $715,891, which would put us kind of in that 3-year prior average number. Option number 2, we could obtain a loan for the Parks Department truck. That's $28,000. Electric Department dump truck, and they also are looking for a pickup. Ed's replacing the operations coordinator truck, and their 2 vehicles in the electric department totals $93,000. So between the 3 vehicles, that's an expenditure of $121,000. Just a small detail there. If we did that, we would delay the debt payments for 6 months in the budget, because it would take us some time to spec the vehicles, put the bid out, get the bid returned. So when you do that, the loan payments would be about $13,000 versus spending the $121,000. So that difference is $107,692 reduction in the budget. So that would take that deficit down to 758,262 as an example. Option 3 is to reduce the amount of capital reserves at the wastewater treatment facility to the same level as the prior 2 years that we budgeted, from 505 to 462,302. That would be a reduction of $78,898. And we have that much that goes into reserves because we're planning for that large project, but our SRF payment, our loan payment, was paid off in 2019, and that was $577,000. We reestablished that in the first run of the budget because we'd like to maintain that as high as we could if we can. But if we go back to the number we've used for the last 2 years, 426, then that would give us some additional revenues, $78,000, almost $79,000, to offset the reduction or increase the reduction of the deficit. We also looked at, council could consider a 2% rate increase, which would be 90 cents a month or $10.80 per year. And that result of 2% increase in sewer rates would yield $43,102. So if you add those two, reducing the transfer to reserves and a 2% rate increase, that would be $122,000 even. And then option 4 is to institute a hiring freeze and do not implement personnel requests that were presented by the Economic Development Department, Police Department, and Electric Department. So we ran the numbers on all that, and the Economic Development part-time person to be hired full-time, the marketing assistant, once you do everything as far as the difference in salary and the part-time to full-time would require benefits. So that total value to the budget is $25,398. The police department, as council is aware, was looking to promote 2 personnel into sergeants because for the last at least 2 years we've been on the platoon system. So 1 sergeant runs 2 shifts, and the chief has talked extensively with the police commissioner and the city manager about having additional management on those shifts because a lot of the staff are newer, has less than 2 years, 10 people less than 2 years of experience. So that cost to promote 2 sergeants from within, adding no more people, would be $7,821. And lastly, the electric department requested a promotion and a new hire to assist with succession planning. If the promotion is postponed until FY23, there would be a reduction of $74,685 in the overall cost of the department. So if you, this would result in an operating transfer to the general fund of $74,685. So the overall effect of option 4, if you put a hiring freeze on and a promotional freeze, is you'll decrease that reserve reliance by $107,000. So we get it down to $757,987. And each of these options is a la carte, so they'll stand alone. You can do that. You can pick 2 or 3 or all of them if you'd like. We just ran some numbers to think about that. Implementations of options 1 through 3 would yield the budget reduction of the budget deficit by $379,000. So options 1 through 3, if you decide to do that, would reduce the deficit to $486,262. If you desire to do implementation of option 1 through 4, that would reduce the deficit by almost $500,000, $487,533. So it would reduce the deficit to $378,358. We didn't run any more options for math, but certainly we can. I know that's a lot to think about. I'll stop real quick. Is there any questions on a lot of that?
So I'll ask council if there's any questions that the city manager, the director of finance, and really every director is here tonight to answer any questions regarding their own personal budgets and their departments. Are there any questions, Councilman King?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Charles, looking at these options, I don't see any option that actually alludes to eliminating the increase to water tap and I'm looking at options, not only are we increasing water, but now we're potentially talking about increasing sewer.
Okay, so what we presented at the last council meeting had no water increase in it. So if you go in your package or in your paperwork, you also have a water sales calculation increase, which we were asked to do. So that operating transfer to general fund, if you do the 3% water increase, would be $30,400. If you don't, and you eliminate that and don't do the transfer, take it back to zero, then that number, wherever we land, would increase by $30,400. Because you're not supporting the general fund with that transfer. So,
Yeah, but it doesn't answer my question.
okay, I'm sorry, I didn't.
So the question was, what option on this paper is to not have any increase to services or utilities at all?
So going back to the original budget presentation that we did on the 5th, didn't have a water increase in it,
But this budget is showing an increase to water.
because we were asked to do that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So what option, if I'm against an
You
increase
you
to
could,
services, what
Councilman King,
option?
you could just make up your own option and say remove. I'd like to motion that we remove the water.
No, I'm just curious to why it wasn't added as an option. The last conversation we had was, we were gonna have options, and I was very adamant at that point that I wasn't in support of any increase to utilities or services. And I don't see that as an option now.
If the directive is to go back to the original option, so that's option number 1 that we presented last time, no increase in water.
Okay.
Absolutely, staff will certainly move forward with the budget that way.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And the other question I have 2 more questions, if that's okay. Can we talk a little bit about transfer tax? To me, that number is extremely low. I mean, when you look at this year, year to date, if I'm looking at that number, I think it's over $650,000 if I'm correct. Does that sound right?
Yeah, we did an update today.
621, I'm sorry, 621,544.
That's today's number.
Yeah,
Yep.
but when I'm looking at what you've got allocated or budgeted, to me, in my opinion, there's, with the market as hot as it is right now, in my opinion, you could add another $100,000 to that transfer tax and drive those numbers down. So if we're concerned with the total dollar, to me, that's still an extremely low number in what you're forecasting in transfer tax.
Okay, so that's option number 1. So the original budget was $400,000.
Yep.
We looked at these numbers and we did a 3-year average, and
Yep.
it comes out to be about $550,000 when you do the 3-year average. So one option to look at is to increase that to the $550,000. The one thing I'll say 2 things about it. Traditionally, when we budget conservatively. And if you look at that trend of those numbers, not so long ago, FY18 and FY19, barely made $300,000, then we just made over $300,000. Because realty transfer tax it's very cyclical because it's tied to the housing market,
Sure.
as you know. That drives some of our being conservative. But we certainly, and we've recommended it as option number 1 to consider. So yeah, I agree. I think we can increase that number without,
Well, my point being, if we increase that by an additional $100,000, do we need, or we're having conversations about increasing services, but if we're adding $100,000, $150,000 to the transfer tax, are they still needed in order to balance our budget?
Well, our budget is not balanced even if because option 1 there, it only reduces the deficit to $751,891.
Well, what I mean is hitting the mark.
Yeah,
So if we're
you're
concerned with
correct.
lowering.
Yeah, maybe I glossed over that a little bit, but if our goal is to get into that bandwidth of about $750,000, which we've been in all except for 1 year for the last 4 years, then that option 1 alone would do that without a rate increase, and just increasing that number, that would get us into the $715,000 range, which that's certainly a viable
Okay.
option.
And just have one more. Can we look at the Gulf Fund for a minute, or?
Sure.
I notice everything's zero. How many dollars, I notice there's no change in the revenue aspect, how many dollars or revenue is the city of Seaford providing to the golf course this year in the budget?
Okay, so I want to make sure, I don't think I'm going to answer your question this way, but the revenue in the budget from the golf course is $75,000. All right, but we're spending to support that $258,589 to support that operation.
So that's what we're transferring out this year to help support? the
Yeah,
golf
it's
course.
coming out of general fund, yes, sir. Mhm.
And what was that number?
$258,598, so $250,000,
Okay.
$250,000.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Yep.
Any other questions? Any other questions from council? Councilman
Yes.
McCoy?
I'll yield.
Go ahead, sir.
So speaking in generalities,
Many years, you know, ideally, we'd love to get that closer to zero, okay? Balanced budget without leaning on any reserves would be,
sure.
it's a lofty goal to have, but it's a goal to have.
So just in generalities, again, why is it important for the city to have reserves capital?
Okay, that's a great question. So, thank you for asking. So we keep our reserves so that in the event we have an emergency, a pipe breaks, the tank at the wastewater treatment plant, we have to come to you out of budget and we need to do it, or a mandate. You know, we're dealing with body cameras over the last year, council moved forward with that. That could have come down as thou shalt do it by January so-and-so. That's when we would use our reserves for emergency purposes, or just like the pandemic, if we had unexpected costs, so we do that. Additionally, when we have large construction projects, which we're moving into now, you know, we pay the contractor and then we would get reimbursed, in this case with Western Sussex Business Park by Sussex County. So there's what I'll call float. We have to pay the payment. We might not get reimbursed from the state or the county for 30 days. So we lean on our reserves for things like that. Just a guide, and maybe this is a question you didn't ask, but for utilities like we run, water, sewer, and electric, the goal, the idea would be to have about 180 days of operating cash in the event of a really bad hurricane emergency where you couldn't get to the banks, things like that. So if you think about a $30 million budget, you know, 10, 12, $15 million would be a really good number to have access to, so you make sure you can provide the services.
I appreciate you reemphasizing that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Also remember too, that the city has been incredibly blessed with funding from the state and from the county beyond measure, beyond what this city has seen in maybe in its lifetime. That's not always going to be the case. We're going to have to fund our own projects, and these projects are expensive, and we're going to have to lean into our reserves, or at least use our reserves as borrowing power, right? If we're going to do big projects, if we wish to grow, if that's our goal. So. Other questions? Councilman Henderson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a clarification or a comment. Councilman King asked what the deficit would be if we eliminated any increases, and that, by my arithmetic, would take us to $559,764. If you take the $486,262 and you add $30,400 to it, plus the $43,102 for sewer, that would bring you to $559,764.
That's if you implemented option 1 through 3.
If you took those three options, correct?
Yes, sir, I agree with your math. And that is certainly a viable option.
It's outside your stated goal of 550. And I do agree with Councilman King that the 621 for three full quarters of real estate transfer tax, I mean, I'm not in favor of swiping all of our revenue. I mean, we should retain some of that for, to increase reserves. The other thing I would say about it is that we have leaned on reserves on paper for this year, but we'll be reimbursed hopefully within this year, so the you know, our reserves won't be drawn down from what we set aside last year, depending on budget performance and how things go for the next 2.5 months. So I feel a little bit better about it, you know, because even with the ambitious projects that we do have, which was, you know, we had ambitious projects last year, but not to this scale, and we still had that type of deficit. So, you know, we have those reserves, and I'm grateful for all the hard work in such a short amount of time, June in your department, and Charles for turning around the information. So I'm not, opposed to forestalling additional revenue by increasing rates. However, I do see the need in, as I've been saying for a long time, is to get our utility rates in line. If we don't get water and sewer rates in line with other municipalities and in line with our electric revenue, so that we can reduce our dependence on electric revenue to reduce possibly our electric rates, then I see the need for those two increases.
Yeah.
But it's not desirable. I think we could possibly postpone it, but I do agree with the need to redistribute revenue away from electric towards water and sewer, because it's more affordable and it's more equitable as far as keeping our electric rates competitive.
Okay. Other questions from council?
I have one more follow-up.
1 second, please. Anybody else have any questions? Councilman King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Charles, when we look at total revenue for the city, and as Councilman Henderson alluded to, we look at reserves. So what % of total income, net income, profit income, are we transferring into reserve, would you say, on a year? What percentage of that total number would you say? Do you have a goal of how many dollars you want to transfer into reserves? And if you do, what percentage does that look like?
Okay, there are some of those guidelines, like, you know, in our water and sewer utilities, electric utilities, you know, we try for 5% in that range. Sometimes we can't do that because we balance the budget and we adjust those numbers, but sometimes we like to do that. I'll go a little further on your question. There's some things that kind of don't really ever hit the budget, okay? So impact and tap fees, as an example, when a builder builds or someone expands, doesn't really go into our operating budget. You know, we account for it, but it goes into a sinking fund so that when we do need to do it, the idea is when you do expansions or you do repairs, you have those impact fees that you can work on. So, and we do predict it. It's in the budget. You know, there are numbers, and again, we budget conservatively. And lately, it kind of follows that realty transfer tax, because, you know, they're kind of together, right? So new houses are built, they pay impact fees, tap fees, and then they sell and they pay transfer tax. So we're seeing that in our budget, but same thing as we've done with our realty transfer tax. We kind of are, it's kind of sticky pricing. We kind of don't raise that very quickly because, again, that can stop. We've seen that happen. I don't know if I completely answered your question or not, but we have some target goals that we shoot for, but we don't always,
So
depending upon the market.
So what does that look like? So for the cities, what does the city do a year in revenue? An average, what's total dollars of revenue?
Okay, so total revenue is 33 million, budgeted 33,328,000. Revenue without internal transfers is 29.66 million. Okay, that's total. Now remember, the way we budget, and I'm glad you brought this up, because in our budget, when we take out a loan or when someone gives us a grant, like the county, that goes in to these numbers. So when you look at those numbers, it's really not, it's not profit. You know, it's for a project, and we'll build the project, we'll do that. But that's not really cash in hand.
It's an in-out.
It's an in-out, yes, but it does not underwrite our general fund budget. So here's the way to kind of look at it. Water, sewer, and electric pay for themselves, and they return us a profit, which is, you know, the electric fund, they paid for themselves, all the people, everything that we do there, and then they return to fund everything else we do, $3.2 million. Sewer, They fund everything, they do what they need to do, everything that you put in the budget, and then they return to you $488,000. Water fund, if you do this, they do everything, pay their people, buy their vehicles, and then they return to you $30,400. So in the simplest of terms, that's kind of the money that we use to fund police, to fund parks, those things that, as everyone knows, right, police doesn't really, they're not a source of revenue, you know, but they're very much needed for economic development and the things that we do, a safe community. So that's what helps us fund those. General fund also has things in it like tax revenue, so that helps us as well to fund those. Does that make sense?
It does, and I appreciate that. And
Yes,
the point
sir.
that I'm alluding to is that money that we generate is, right, the people that live in our community or do business in our community. So when you're looking at the total dollars that we're raising, that we're transferring in and paying to do everything in return the services that we provide the city, to me, when you're looking at, if we're transferring large dollars into the reserve, which we do need a reserve, but if we're transferring large amounts of money, my opinion is we can lower that down, provide a better quality of life for our residents, but then not overcharge them, right? So try to get it affordable and get it to where it matches or marries up as close as we possibly.
Over time to take steps forward. It's really no different than, and ask, when Councilman Henderson was the electric commissioner, and then he turned that over to Councilman McCoy. We have been on about help me out, Councilman, about a 10-year process to shift our rates, and we're putting more of our rate into fixed costs, so that customer charge, and less into the volumetric charge. And that's a prudent move because there's disruptive technologies out there, right? Solar and everything. So those customers, based on the old volumetric charge, don't pay. So we've been marching down that road slowly but surely, and it's prudent, and our rates have to evolve. We have not changed the way we bill for water rates, I'm gonna say in 35 or 40 years. And it's probably time to modernize our rates, and as the councilman said, you know, we really need to look at where the market's at, so on and so forth. If we continue to do what we're doing, I think over time, and we don't raise our rates are gonna continue to get cheaper and cheaper. And our rates are such now that, you know, the water rate, a 1% increase only returns us $10,000. So it's not a large business, but.
Yep, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that.
Councilman Henderson?
So, continuing on Councilman King's thoughts there, is it the combined water and sewer rate that gets you above the 2% threshold for principal forgiveness for large projects?
Yeah, that's one of the metrics that they use, but that is the standard. So for water and sewer, it's 2%. If it's sewer alone, it's 1.5%. They do some of those loans as well.
Even though I'm hesitant to raise rates, I see the value in raising the rate on the sewer and water slightly, so that we can get into that 2% threshold, so that when we go to get loans, we get principal forgiveness on the revolving fund loans. That benefits the people of Seaford even more than a $10, was it $10 a year on water?
On the sewer.
What was the number?
Okay, so water, if you do the 3% increase, 70 cents a month, $8.40 a year.
So, and then the sewer was?
Sewer would be 90 cents a month for 2%,
Right.
90 cents a month or $10.80.
So for $20 a year per customer,
1920, yes, sir.
we could save millions of dollars on loans.
You
for
could.
principal
You
forgiveness.
could, that's a great point. We should be thinking about positioning ourselves. An interesting calculation, I did it today in anticipation of this meeting. So when we did this originally, this number, this is the slide where we did not raise any rates, okay? So if we do the aforementioned, and it's 5% between water and sewer, okay, I put it all in there together, that number goes to 1.62. So that kind of shows you how small a $19.20 rate increase is to the customers. It's a rate increase. I can't say it's not.
But then you also got to add in, we voted for an increase to electricity too, right? So we got to add that into the number.
Yeah.
Monthly increase. So
Yeah, $2 a month.
So now we're at $22 a month.
Yeah, plus this, so $42 a
Right.
month, you
Right.
know, for water, sewer, and electric. I mean, yeah, and that was a wholesale rate pass-through,
Yeah,
a year.
For a
Thank you.
year, yeah.
Thank you, Burley.
Yeah, for a
Keep it
year.
straight.
I would like to stress that it was a reduction in a credit
Right,
that we were already experiencing, that we'll be examining rates
right.
later in the year, in the fall. So technically, yes, somebody's going to pay more because they're getting less of a credit.
Right.
But, you know, we won't be addressing rates until, is it November, December?
Yeah, it might even be a little later, but that's tradition, we try to do it before Christmas. And I will say, we are working with Smart Utility Management to come in and do a similar analysis of our water and sewer rates, because it's time to do it. Council's talked about that, and the Director of Finance and I are working with him to prepare that for the Operations Committee.
Well, if that's the case, if I might, if that's the case, would Smart Utility Management be presenting that scenario at the same time as electric?
We could certainly have him do that while he's here, but because it's the Electric Committee and the Operations Committee, we could certainly do a joint meeting, which I'll be honest, that might not be a terrible idea, especially if we're talking about, you know, a holistic approach to this. We could certainly tee that up if you think that's the way to go.
My personal opinion is that we would forestall a projected rate increase for water and sewer until this study comes out and we can really drill down on it in the fall or winter, along with electric rates. And we just, it may be that we all sit around this table and determine that rates really need to be done.
Yeah,
Right,
or not.
and have a professional study done that says this is the right thing to do, rather than us sitting here and saying, well, we think, we feel if we have a professional study done and it says these rates are warranted or these are justified, then I would feel much better about it and just forestall the increase in $73,500. And if it turns out in 5 months or 6 months that we need to do it, then we go ahead and do it.
Yeah, and I think another piece to that puzzle that'll be showing itself to us, and the Director of Public Works is going to help me out, but we anticipate a loan offer on the Route 13 North sewer from the State Revolving Fund within the next few months. So that'll help us with their financial analysis to show what the effect of that rate is. Yeah. And it's kind of fortuitous because that's $1.5 million project, and we're getting ready to move into, you know, a $7 million project for the headwork. So it would give us some time. If we need to do anything defensive, we can do it. We might not need to.
Is there a look-back period for these rates, or is it the current rate when you make the application?
It's the rate when you make the application. Okay. Now I'll say this. What they do in their analysis is they contemplate your debt service as well. So some of this is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's probably going to force you to raise your rates when you start talking multi-million-dollar projects, right, just to cover the debt service and not have rate shock. Right. And I think that's the biggest thing we're trying to protect our customers from is, you know, having these large swings in pricing.
Councilman McCoy.
Yeah, so to Councilman King's point, I'm not against looking into eliminating the water increase as well as looking at another option from sewer. To the mayor's point, though, at some point, as commerce continues in the city of Seaford, there's going to be a tally for this, and we're going to be taking on a larger piece of that pie as we move forward. So, again, I'm open to the suggestion of looking at that now. I think it's important for us as a council to realize that we may have to look at a larger number down the line if we do that. I think it's important to take into account. And And if we do that, again, that increases the number to, I think the total deficit would be 895, give or take, if we add the 30,000 from the water, if we eliminate that, is that correct?
I mean, there's a lot of options here, it depends what you do, but yeah, if you just take the deficit as it stands, the
Yeah.
budget as presented, don't do any of the options that we've suggested tonight,
Yeah.
then, yeah, that looks about right.
So to that point, we still have work to do to get that number down. I guess my question is for you, Councilman King. You mentioned the realty transfer tax. What would that proposal look like? You mentioned increasing that number, or do you have any additional details for
Yeah,
that?
so based off of this year, the information that I was able, and that number may have changed, but so far trending this year, the city of Seaford has generated $621,544.38 in transfer tax. If you look at the budget, what is forecast, Charles, can we pull that back up?
It's
The
400,000.
transfer tax, please.
I want to make sure I go the right way.
All right, thank you. Yep, they say the budget, what's forecast is 400, is that 400,000?
Well, what's in the budget is $400,000. What this is actually tax collection. So this is not a budget number. This is what we actually took in
Right.
those years. Okay?
Right, so I understand that, but what's in the what have you forecast? How much?
400,000 is in the
Right.
budget currently.
So 400,000 is in the budget, in reality, we're over 600,000. So what I'm saying is that, to me, I think that projection is extremely low. I think there's room to push that number up and still hit your target. And so if you're adding another 150,000 or 200,000 to that budget, that line item, you're talking a reduction of $100,000 to $150,000 without doing anything. But, except, in my opinion, making that number more realistic.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
And just to be clear, that's option one, where that number gets bumped from
It's-
400 to
it-
550.
I'm sorry, it's option one, but you would have to add $30,400 to the 715. So let's call it 1A.
Now, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Now, I love the idea of Councilman Henderson, and I appreciate his leadership, and I really like what he had to say. What he said is not an option.
Yes, sir, it is.
So having somebody go in and actually do a study and come back and provide us the information around rate increases and,
Yeah, that's in the
Service-
works. Yeah, we were hopeful to have it in advance of this. We just, the
but what
consultant
option,
wasn't ready.
what option does that show?
So what the councilman suggested, and certainly Councilman Henderson, if I misstate this, I think where he was headed, that if we want to, for now, if we want to forego any rate increases, he would be in favor of that until we get the study and harder information. So the option there would be no rate increases, which was our original budget presentation, no water sewer
Right.
increases.
I understand that, but how, can we add in the study that he's referencing? So then when we come back, if we do need to vote on an increase, we have more information to make a
Sure.
more educated decision.
Yeah, council can raise rates at any time, okay? So we can go through the presentations, we can go through the hearings about it, the information. Should you decide to do it kind of out of budget, you certainly can. We can delay it until the next budget. It's,
Okay.
you know, it's entirely up to council's decision.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So could you go to the slide that says reserve account status?
Yes, sir. I'm going the wrong way.
Well, that looks a little different than the one I have in front of me, but are the numbers? The numbers are basically, there's some differences, but the numbers appear to be the same, similar. So you have general fund restricted balance. Can you explain to us how they're restricted and what they're reserved for?
Okay, so I'm gonna get this wrong. I'm gonna ask the Director of Finance if she'll come up and give a better detailed explanation. I don't want to mislead. I certainly didn't want to go with that one.
No, all right, so, okay, now this this slide says general fund reserves, so, okay, but no, go back one. I see what you've done. So it looks like on the left-hand side is just what's called general fund reserves. And then on the right-hand side is the general fund restricted reserves. So those are two different accounts.
Yes.
And within those accounts, there's multiple different things. But under restricted was your question, there is realty transfer tax reserves are in restricted. Because again, that was years ago, that was designated to be used for projects such as economic development. We don't just use it for just any project. So
Okay.
anyway, that's in there. The fire equipment reserves, which is, again, through the budget process, it's a set aside for the fire department for equipment. That is in that account. And there's a health insurance reserve fund in there, which is specifically just for that, because we are partially self-funded. So there are times where if we have a year where Integra, they project out our rates, but because of claims, maybe there's, significant claims history, and so what we normally pay on a monthly basis, they might have to call us and say, we need additional funds. So
Okay.
there's that account. Trying to remember, anyway, it's just a handful of things. There's not tons in that restricted reserves.
So I think it's fair to say that with this deficit, most of this deficit is due to capital projects, right?
Yes,
And-
yeah, in this budget now is $5 million, yeah, I'm right, correct, just over $5 million worth of capital. So, yeah, and we show these general fund reserve accounts and track them because this is where we take our deficit spending should we need to take it out of.
Right. So your chart is a little different than mine, the one that I have in my pack. But it shows the general fund restricted reserve growing over time over the last 2 to 3 years. Well, it's not listed for 2021, but 2018, 2019, and 2020. So the restricted reserve has risen to $2.34 million. And out of those reserves would be basically the real estate transfer tax that we've received. Even though it rises and we may take $400,000 or $600,000 a year, that money is withdrawn from time to time to do other projects. So
Sir.
I can understand why it's not so large. But I think it's also fair to say that we're being prudent because real estate transfer is for economic development. And that's precisely what these capital projects are designed to do. The business campus, the sewer up and down Route 13, sewer and water. Most all of these infrastructure programs are designed for economic development. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're going to use these funds for that purpose. So it makes me even more comfortable to tap some of that money for this year's budget.
Where does the sinking fund for the wastewater treatment plant go?
So
In the restricted?
sewer reserve, yeah, and it's restricted to the extent that's for the sewer.
It's for the
And you got
expansion.
the
So
council.
it should be growing, because we're dumping in there every year.
Yeah, and I think that's a point. Again, general fund reserve, general fund restricted reserve are shown in the total $8.7 million.
Right.
But as Councilman Henderson said, we track this and look for that trend because these are the accounts we lean on to balance our budget, do some of the day-to-day operations. This one is more holistically looking at this. And, as an example, the Gulf Fund Reserve, we created that any additional revenue we get from our golf contract, we put in there. That's what we bought our golf carts with, some other things that we needed to do for emergency purposes. But the 3.5, we're trying to get that up so that we can make a substantial payment on our expansions coming up.
Right. Other questions? Councilman Santos?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to go back to the increase of 2% and how that is related with the loan forgiveness that I believe you mentioned. Or so if the rates are over 2%, then we qualify for, you said, for loan forgiveness?
If your rates are below 2%, what the state SRF, State Revolving Fund Loan, tells you is you have room to raise your rates. So raise your rates to at least the affordability standard, then we'll help you keep them at that affordability standard. So what Councilman Henderson was pointing out was that if, you know, with that headroom we have to 2%, we could lose that portion of a loan. And when you're looking at a 20-year loan for, you know, $20 million, that could be a huge legacy cost if we're not careful.
Okay.
It's a number we watch. We keenly look at it.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions from council? All right, we don't necessarily need to make a motion tonight, but if someone's ready to, before we do, I just wanted to make a little statement that, again, I wanted to thank the city for putting this together and to remind this council has voted for holding the fees and taxes and utility costs for 6 to 8 years now. We did a minor increase one time, all to spur economic development on. And I guess if you look around Seaford today, you would say that what you guys have voted for has worked. And so I'm not a fan of raising rates, but I do believe there is a time to raise rates. We can't continually not raising rates. We have to keep up, as prices are going to go up this year pretty radically. It's better to raise rates in a time when people are doing well than when the economy's tanking. So it's something to consider.
I'll add, this slide points that out. You know, we have not raised water and sewer rates since FY18, so half a decade since we raised our rates.
So my concern is, again, I'm not a fan of raising rates. This is a very, $20 is a lot of money to a lot of people, I guess, a year, but it's also a pretty small increase. I'm a fan of doing the study. I'd be concerned, or I'd caution council that the study may prove we need to raise our rates 15 or 20%. And that's a whole different ballgame. I'd rather take small increases that people can afford and can manage versus that. So just again, I want to thank our directors for everybody being here and what they put into it. And again, I know you guys have sacrificed over the years to stay lean so we can make our budgets to be aggressive and to grow business. And I want to thank you for doing that and appreciate what you guys have done.
Thank
so
you,
with
Mayor.
that, if anybody has any questions, let's ask now. If someone wants to propose an option on the budget to take to city council.
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if I understood you correctly, option one has no increase to any services whatsoever. Option one?
As presented here, these
Yeah.
numbers that you're looking at, it includes the water increase as we were asked to do.
So option one does.
Yes, sir, those numbers.
So is there anything on here that does not, any option on here that does not reflect any increase whatsoever?
The water increase is in all these calculations.
Okay, so right, so my question is no. So there's not an option on here that says that for no increase to services.
That goes back to the original one that you were given at the last budget meeting. That had no water or sewer increases in them.
So
we can certainly go back to that.
Right, but what I'm saying is if I want to make a motion to
Well, maybe I could ask this, okay? A couple things. Is there a desire, is the consensus from the council to have an additional budget meeting?
Does anybody here think we need an additional budget meeting?
And I'll just say, the next Tuesday that would be available, if that's the date people would like, would be June 1st. And we certainly, the next question, the consensus would be, what would you like to see? Now, if you desire another budget meeting, absolutely we can do that. If we can come to a consensus of what you'd like to see, and it's pretty straightforward, we could certainly bring that to the June 8th council meeting. So we'd have time to talk about that individually at liaison meetings if there are any questions.
All right,
I'll just ask that question.
Yeah, does anybody have any desire to bring additional information to an additional budget meeting
Are you
for
looking
June
for-
1st.
Are you looking for a motion?
We probably should do it as a motion, yes. I think that's probably wise.
I would,
I was gonna say something, Charles, but not to interject, but I think, and just correct me if I'm wrong, you can make any motion you want. So
Yeah,
if
yes.
you want option one with a motion to not have.
Right,
You don't have to just do those.
No, and I
correct.
appreciate that, and that's why I'm getting clarity, because this is all that's presented to us, is these options.
But you can do.
You can add or tweak those
Right.
anyhow you'd
Right,
like.
but that's the whole, right, and I appreciate it, that's why I wanted to get clarity to make sure that, because it doesn't say that. And so I wanted like I said, the question was, is that reflective in any of these options, and the answer was no.
We used the updated numbers, which council asked us to give the
Point
option
of order.
of the.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, I had the floor.
Yes, sir.
I'm prepared, I would like to make a motion to have the council, or to have the administration come before council and consider option 1 through 3 without any increases in rates. And present it at the next workshop, because we have additional revenues coming in. We may be receiving reimbursements, which will tell us where our current leaning on reserves is. So therefore, I make a motion to direct the administration to consider options 1 through 3 without water and sewer increases.
And Councilman King, I'll second his motion.
All right, so we have a motion to postpone and come back on June 1st with the administration running options 1, 2, and 3 with no rate increases based on current information. We have a motion and a second. Yes, sir.
This with the study that you're having done before we come back, or this?
No.
Okay.
So we'll do an all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. So
Thank you.
you'll bring this back to the June 1st meeting with new numbers, and we'll go from there. And with that, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Councilman McCoy, so moved.
Okay, you have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Unanimous.